Have you ever felt completely in control of a decision, only to wonder later if you really had a choice?
Hmm. Yeah, that little nagging feeling.
Exactly. And that feeling, it sits right at the heart of a debate that's, well, it's puzzled thinkers for centuries, really.
The big one. Do we actually have free will? Or are our lives just sort of playing out according to some predetermined script?
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping straight into that very question. It's this ongoing philosophical tug of war between free will and determinism.
And we've got quite a bit to unpack here. Philosophical arguments, some pretty surprising scientific findings.
Yeah, and even how theology weighs in. So our mission today, our deep dive, is to try and cut through some of that complexity.
Right, to really understand the core ideas from, all the different angles.
Because whether you're facing a big life choice or maybe thinking about responsibility for something you did.
Or even just curious about, well, how reality works. This whole free will question, it has some pretty profound implications.
Totally. It shapes how we see ourselves. Justice, achievement, all of it. So maybe we should start with the basics. Like, what are we actually talking about with free will and determinism?
Good starting point.
Okay.
So free will, generally it's that capacity we feel we have, right? To choose between different actions.
That intuitive sense that, okay, I have options A and B, and I am the one making the call, unconstrained.
Exactly. And it's really, really tied to our ideas about moral responsibility. The whole concept kind of hinges on it.
Yeah, the thinking goes, if you didn't freely choose to do something, can you really be held accountable?
Precisely. When we praise someone or blame them, we're usually assuming they could have done otherwise.
Okay, so that's free will in a nutshell. What about the other side? Determinism.
Right, determinism. This is the view that essentially all events, and that includes our human actions, are causally inevitable.
Yeah.
They're necessary consequences of prior conditions.
Like dominoes falling once the first one goes.
That's a classic way to put it. Given the exact state of the universe at one moment, plus the laws of nature, everything that happens next, including your decision, was already locked in.
Okay, wow. That definitely feels like it clashes with that intuitive sense of freedom we just talked about.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
If every choice is just the end result of this massive causal chain going back forever, basically,
Yeah.
Where does my choice fit in?
Yeah. And that tension, that apparent contradiction, leads us straight into the first major split in this whole debate. Incompatibilism.
Right. Incompatibilism. The name kind of says it all.
Right.
The core idea here is that free will and determinism just cannot both be true. They're mutually exclusive.
You have to pick one.
You have to pick one, according to incompatibilists. And within that camp, you've got different flavors. First up, hard determinism.
Hard determinism sounds pretty firm.
It is. They say, look, determinism is true. The universe operates on cause and effect. Therefore,
Free will must be an illusion.
exactly. What we feel is free choice is just a misperception. Every single thing we do, think, or decide is ultimately caused by factors way outside our control.
So me deciding whether to, have tea or coffee this morning, that was already baked in.
According to hard determinists, yes. The outcome was inevitable based on everything that came before.
Huh. Okay. So what's the opposing view within incompatibilism?
That would be metaphysical libertarianism. And let's be clear, this isn't about politics.
Right. Philosophical libertarianism.
Yes. This view argues the opposite. Determinism is false. And because it's false, we humans do possess genuine free will.
So our choices aren't entirely cooked up by prior events. There's real openness.
That's the idea. There's a genuine element of possibility. We are, in some significant way, the originators of our actions. Some theological versions even stress being free from, like our own flawed nature or any divine prescripting.
So for the libertarian, when I decide, say, to pick up the phone and call someone, that's not just a predetermined domino falling. I genuinely could have chosen not to.
Correct. It's a strong rejection of that purely mechanistic cause and effect view of human action.
Okay. And you mentioned different flavors. Is there another incompatibilist position?
There is, yeah. It's called hard incompatibilism. It's maybe even more radical.
More radical than hard determinism. How so?
Well, hard incompatibilists argue that free will is impossible, regardless of whether determinism is true or false.
Wait, how does that work?
Their point is, okay, maybe the universe isn't strictly deterministic. Maybe there's randomness, like quantum indeterminacy. But does randomness actually give us control? If my choice is just the result of some random quantum fluctuation in my brain, did I really choose it?
Ah, I see. Randomness doesn't equal meaningful control or agency. A random event isn't the same as a willed action.
Precisely. So for them, neither a determined world nor a randomly undetermined world seems to allow for the kind of free will we intuitively feel we have.
Okay, that's a lot to chew on. So those are the views saying free will and determinism can't coexist. But not everyone agrees with that, right?
Yeah. Not at all. That brings us to the other major camp, compatibilism.
Compatibilism, making them compatible.
Exactly. Compatibilists believe that free will and determinism can actually coexist. They aren't fundamentally opposed.
So how do they square that circle? It seems like such a direct conflict.
Well, a key move for many compatibilists is to redefine what we mean by free.
Okay, so free doesn't necessarily mean uncaused by anything before.
Right. For many compatibilists, free means acting without constraints or coercion or compulsion.
So it's about internal versus external factors. If I want to do something and nothing is forcing me or stopping me, then I'm acting freely, even if my wanting it has a whole causal history.
That's a very common way to frame it. If you choose the coffee because you like coffee and nobody's holding a gun to your head forcing you to drink tea, that's a free choice in the compatibilist sense.
Even if the reasons why I like coffee are ultimately determined by genetics, upbringing, past experiences, whatever.
Exactly. The focus shifts from whether the action was caused to whether it was compelled or flowed from your own desires and values.
That actually feels closer to how we often use the word free in everyday life, doesn't it?
It does seem to resonate more with our common understanding, and some important thinkers helped shape this view, like G.V. Moore.
Yeah, tell me about his idea.
Moore suggested that acting freely essentially means that you would have done otherwise if you had chosen to.
If I had chosen differently.
Right, even if the choice itself was determined. The crucial thing is this hypothetical connection. If your internal state, your choice, had been different, your action would have followed suit.
Okay, so the link between my will and my action is intact. Even if the will itself was determined, the fact that my actions follow my will makes it free in this sense.
That's the core idea. It preserves a link between intention and outcome.
Interesting. And then there's Harry Frankfurt with his rather famous thought experiments.
Ah, yes, Frankfurt cases. Very influential. Frankfurt shifts the focus even further. He argues that free will is really about whether you identify with or endorse the desires that move you to act, regardless of where those desires came from.
Okay, identify with the desire. How does that work?
Well, think about his classic example.
Right.
Imagine someone, let's call him Black, wants you to vote for candidate A. Black is secretly prepared to manipulate your brain to make you vote for A if you show any sign of voting for candidate B.
Okay, so I have no real alternative option in that scenario.
Exactly. But suppose you, completely on your own, decide you genuinely prefer candidate A and you vote for A for your own reasons. Black never has to intervene.
Right, so I voted the way Black wanted, but he didn't actually do anything.
Correct. Frankfurt argues that in this case, you voted freely and are morally responsible for your vote, even though you literally could not have done otherwise.
Because the action stemmed from my will, the will I identify with, even if alternatives were impossible.
Precisely. The source of the action is your endorsed desire, not the absence of alternatives. It's about ownership of the motivation.
That's a clever way around the could have done otherwise requirement.
So, okay, we've got these big philosophical camps. What about science? Has science shed any light on this? Neuroscience, maybe?
Ah, yes. This is where Benjamin Libet's experiments come in. They really stirred the pot back in the 80s.
I've heard about those. Didn't they find something about brain activity happening before people felt they made a decision?
That's the headline finding, yes. Libet measured brain activity, specifically something called the readiness potential, which ramps up before a voluntary movement. And he found this readiness potential started building before the person reported consciously deciding to, say, flick their wrist.
So the brain was getting ready to act before the person consciously willed it to act.
That was the controversial interpretation. It seemed to suggest that our conscious decision might just be an afterthought, something that happens after the brain has already unconsciously initiated the action. Whoa, so maybe our feeling of consciously deciding is just reporting on something that already started, not actually causing it.
That was the implication many drew, yeah. It seemed like a direct challenge to the idea that our conscious will is the starting point of our actions.
That's kind of unsettling, isn't it? Makes you question how much control you really have.
Definitely. But it's important to know there's been a lot of debate and criticism surrounding Libet's work and its interpretation.
Oh, Like what?
Well, several things. Some argue the readiness potential might not signal a specific decision to act now, but more like a general buildup of readiness or urge.
Okay, like the brain getting ready in case a decision is made, not the decision itself.
Possibly. Others point out that the actions in Libet's experiments were super simple, flicking a wrist whenever you feel like it. It's a big leap to generalize that to complex, reasoned decisions, like choosing a career or ending a relationship.
Right, deciding when to flick your wrist isn't quite the same as making a major life choice.
Not quite. And there's also the idea of a conscious veto. Maybe the unconscious brain initiates an urge, but consciousness still has the power to stop it, to say no. Libet himself even suggested this possibility.
Ah, okay, so even if the impulse starts unconsciously, we might still have conscious control over whether we act on it.
That's a key counterargument. So while Libet's work is fascinating and forced a lot of rethinking, it's definitely not seen as the final nail in the coffin for free will.
Got it. Neuroscience gives us clues, but maybe not the whole answer. What about other areas of science? Physics? Quantum mechanics comes up sometimes, doesn't it?
It does. This is where things get even more mind-bending, perhaps. Quantum mechanics, our best description of the subatomic world, seems to have randomness baked into it.
Right, things aren't perfectly predictable at that level. It's about probabilities.
Exactly. Unlike classical physics, where knowing the present state lets you predict the future perfectly, quantum mechanics says there's inherent unpredictability. This fundamentally challenges that strict deterministic cause and effect picture.
So if the universe isn't strictly deterministic at its most basic level, maybe that opens a door for free will.
That's the hope for some. People have tried to connect this quantum indeterminacy to free will. There's the free will theorem by Conway and Kochen, for instance.
The free will theorem, what does that say?
Well, simplifying quite a bit, it draws a mathematical link between the apparent freedom or unpredictability observed in quantum particles under certain conditions and the potential for free will in experimenters, suggesting if particles have it, maybe we do too.
That's wild, linking particle behavior to human choice.
It's highly theoretical and debated, of course.
Right.
But the big hurdle, as we touched on with hard incompatibilism, is that randomness doesn't automatically equal willed action.
Right, the coin toss problem again. Just because something is random doesn't mean I controlled it in a meaningful way.
Precisely. How does subatomic randomness translate into conscious, reasoned choices? That connection is far from clear.
Are there any specific theories trying to make that connection?
There are some more speculative ones, like the Penrose-Hameroff theory, which suggests quantum processes might be happening inside tiny structures in our brain cells, called microtubules, and that these could be linked to consciousness.
Quantum consciousness in microtubules. Sounds pretty out there.
It's definitely not mainstream neuroscience or physics, but it shows people are actively looking for ways quantum effects might play a role. But again, it's highly speculative.
Okay, so quantum mechanics offers indeterminacy, but not necessarily a clear path to free will as we normally think of it. So let's go back to philosophy. How have thinkers tried to build models that maybe incorporate some of these ideas, like indeterminism, but still make sense of our choices? Daniel Dennett's model comes to mind.
Yes, Dennett, who's a compatibilist, proposed a really interesting two-stage model. He wanted to, as he put it, install indeterminism in the right place.
The right place, what does that mean?
Well, his model has two stages. First, there's a consideration generator. This stage produces a range of possibilities, options for action or thought. And this stage, Dennett suggests, might involve some genuine indeterminism, some randomness.
Okay, so it's like your brain is brainstorming options, maybe some random ideas pop up alongside more reasoned ones.
Sort of, yeah. It generates a set of potential considerations. Then stage 2 kicks in. A more deterministic reasoning process evaluates these options based on your beliefs, desires, goals, and selects the best one.
Ah, so randomness helps generate the menu, but your reasoned self picks the meal.
That's a great analogy. Dennett argues this preserves meaningful freedom because while the initial options might have a random element, the selection process is rational and reflects who you are. That's where moral responsibility lies, he thinks.
So it combines a bit of randomness with deterministic reasoning. But has everyone bought into that? What about the libertarians, like Robert Kane?
Right, Kane, a prominent libertarian, has critiqued Dennett's model. His concern is similar to the general randomness problem. If chance is significantly involved in generating the options you even consider, can you be truly ultimately responsible for the final choice?
Because the options you had to choose from were partly random.
Exactly. Kane puts a much stronger emphasis on what he calls ultimate responsibility. He thinks genuine free will requires us to be the ultimate source or originator of our actions, especially in crucial character-forming moments.
Self-forming actions, I think he calls them.
Yes, self-forming actions or SFAs. Kane argues that these occur during difficult choices, moments of inner conflict where we genuinely could go either way, like choosing between acting morally or acting out of ambition when they conflict.
And in those moments, our choice isn't determined by our past?
According to Kane, no. These choices are undetermined, and by making them, we shape our own character and future motivations. It's much more robust, demanding view of libertarian freedom than Dennett's compatibilist model offers. He's trying to locate indeterminism right within the effort of will itself during these conflicts.
Okay, so we have these different philosophical models trying to make sense of it all. This inevitably brings us back to that crucial issue, moral responsibility.
Absolutely. It's arguably the reason this debate matters so much outside of philosophy lecture halls.
Because our entire systems of justice, praise, blame, reward, they seem to rest on the idea that people are responsible for what they do.
Traditionally, yes. The link seems direct. If you weren't free to choose, how can we hold you accountable?
So how do the different camps handle this? Compatibilists, for instance. They think determinism and free will fit together. So how do they preserve responsibility?
Well, remember their definition of freedom. Not absence of cause, but absence of coercion or constraint. So they argue, you can be held responsible if you acted according to your own values and desires, without being forced. Even if those desires were ultimately determined, your actions still flowed from you, from your character.
Like in Dennett's model, the reasoning part is still yours.
Exactly. Responsibility attaches to actions that reflect your considered judgments and settled character, regardless of the ultimate origin story of that character.
Okay. But what about the hard determinists? If they think free will is an illusion because everything is determined, how do they justify holding anyone responsible for anything?
That's the million-dollar question for them. It's a real challenge. Some hard determinists lean towards consequentialist arguments. Meaning they argue that even if people don't have metaphysical free will, the practices of holding people responsible, praising, blaming, punishing, still have good consequences for society.
So it's not about whether people truly deserve blame, but about whether blaming them helps regulate behavior.
Pretty much. They might argue that punishment deters crime, or that praise encourages pro-social behavior, and these systems work to shape future actions, even if those future actions are also determined. It's a pragmatic justification, not one based on desert.
That feels like a really different way of thinking about morality. Less about cosmic justice, more about social engineering almost.
You can certainly feel that way. It shifts the focus significantly.
Okay. Now, we mentioned theology earlier. This free will question pops up there too, especially concerning God's knowledge and power.
Oh, definitely. It's a huge topic in theology, often framed around divine foreknowledge and sovereignty versus human freedom. If God already knows everything, that will happen.
Then how can my choices be genuinely free? It seems like the script is already written.
Exactly, that tension. And broadly speaking, there are two main theological approaches trying to reconcile this.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first mirrors the philosophical compatibilist position. It's a theological compatibilism.
So God's determination and human free will can coexist?
That's the view. A common phrasing is something like, man freely chooses what God has determined that he will choose.
Freely chooses what's already determined. How does that work?
The idea is that God's sovereign plan includes and incorporates our genuine choices. Our actions are truly ours, willed by us, reflecting our desires, and they are simultaneously part of God's predetermined plan. It tries to uphold both divine control and human responsibility.
A delicate balance, for sure. What's the alternative theological view?
That would be the libertarian theological view. This aligns more with philosophical libertarianism.
So it emphasizes real, undetermined freedom.
Yes. It holds that for free will to be genuine, it must involve freedom from any kind of predetermination by God. Humans must have the ability to make choices that are not causally necessitated by God's decree or foreknowledge.
Which implies maybe God doesn't know the future in exhaustive detail, or chooses not to control everything.
That's often where these views lead, yes. Traditions like open theism or Arminianism often fit here. They tend to emphasize God limiting his control or knowledge to allow for genuine human freedom, seeing that freedom is crucial for things like love and moral accountability.
So one view sees freedom operating within God's plan. The other sees freedom requiring some independence from it. It really shows how deep this free will question runs.
Absolutely. It touches Philosophy, science, theology, fundamental aspects of how we understand reality and our place in it.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, it feels like, no, there's no easy answer, is there?
Definitely not. It remains one of the most persistent and, frankly, perplexing questions. We've seen strong arguments on all sides.
Yeah, let's quickly recap the main possibilities we've looked at. There's the incompatibilist view. Free will and determinism can't mix. And if the world is largely deterministic, at least at the macro level we live in,
Then libertarian free will seems unlikely. That leads to hard determinism or maybe hard incompatibilism.
then there's compatibilism, trying to salvage freedom by redefining it not as uncaused, but as uncoerced, acting from your own desires.
Right, which seems to align better with our everyday sense of freedom, maybe, but might not satisfy the desire for ultimate authorship.
We also touched on quantum indeterminacy introducing randomness, but it's debatable if that randomness actually translates into meaningful control.
Yeah, the randomness problem remains a sticking point for many libertarian views trying to leverage quantum mechanics.
And underlying all of this, maybe part of the problem is just we don't all agree on what the key terms free will, choice actually mean.
That's a very real possibility. Semantic confusion might be fueling some of the disagreement.
But regardless of where you land on the metaphysics, that feeling of making choices, of being an agent, it's incredibly powerful, isn't it?
Undeniably. Our subjective experience of freedom is central to being human. Our laws, our relationships, our sense of self, they're all built around it.
So even if it turns out to be, as some argue, a kind of illusion,
It might be a necessary one, a deeply ingrained, perhaps essential, part of how our minds and societies function.
so here's something for you, the listener, to think about as you go about your day, making all those countless little and big decisions.
Consider this. Does that powerful feeling of freedom actually equate to genuine metaphysical free will?
Or could it be a compelling, maybe even vital, illusion? And maybe more importantly, how does your answer, whatever it is, shape how you understand yourself, your responsibility, and your place in the universe?
It's a question with no easy answers, but pondering it definitely changes how you see things.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us into the complex world of free will and determinism.